Okay, someone had a beautiful photograph on Facebook, and that their goal is to kind of try to, I don't know, replicate or do something in the spirit of the photographs that they've taken before. And I'm not referencing the photograph right here because a lot of times if you don't have the exact type of imagery shown in a photograph and whatnot, it can be kind of frustrating trying to do replication. So I'm doing something more in the spirit of kind of my memory of that photograph. Or, I mean, that's often done with any type of thing that I see in scenes or whatnot. I might reference things sometimes, and it's a good exercise to go through because you can learn all kinds of different techniques, but inevitably what I like to do is I like to take scenes in kind of a direction that they seem to want to go in as I'm working on them. Okay, now the gist of it was there was a very large tree here on the side, and it had a lot of tree branches overhanging kind of in silhouette in the foreground. And that tree took up a lot of this space right here on the right-hand side. And then there was this grassy area in here, which I think had a really wonderful kind of glowing kind of look to it. And things went off in the distance like this way, kind of in perspective, okay? Now, I don't know if I'm going to try to do something like that, but then there was this really great kind of twilight sky, or I don't know if it was sunrise, but it looked more kind of in the spirit of Twilight to me. So, not that those two different skies have to be different, but I'm going to be doing something like that. So I'll be doing some trees over here, and I'll put some kind of larger tree trunk over here. I was thinking about going with my mossy covered trees, but I think I might be going with something more of a kind of a stronger solid over this way. And then I want to have some kind of things down here around the base of the tree, kind of transitioning from this green meadow area into this kind of browner area where grass isn't growing underneath this canopy of leaves and whatnot. So anyways, a lot going on here, and that's kind of the gist of it. But anyways, what I'm going to do, though, is there was this really great glow working underneath the surface of this greens and kind of darker twilight. This is going to be all about the shadows in here. And I feel that this it's going to look kind of weird, as most scenes often do with certain types of color schemes, until you get to that color or value that's going to kind of bring all of the different objects together. And that one happens to be black, because of the strong silhouettes that are happening within this given composition, okay? So, that being said, I think the thing that looked like it would serve me the best in terms of a process, I felt, was getting kind of a foundation established using a universal base coat, because there was a lot of different things going on within that color scheme. We had this kind of earthy, brown-toned areas underneath the tree, which were mostly black, but you can see this kind of glowing, radiant color. And then, okay, now this is going to represent kind of my land area. And then in the sky, there were some warmer tones down here, and then it transitioned up into, I don't know, there might have been some blues or something like that, but we're thinking twilight and transition. So I'm going to create somewhat of a relationship between the ground and the sky with a universal color. In this case, I happen to be using a very pale, kind of warm tan color, and that's the Distress Ink Antique Linen. Okay, so any kind of color like that, it's my preference usually to go with kind of a lighter tone, because you don't have to make any big kind of commitment to any given hue if you kind of start light, because you can put medium and darker tones over the top of it and alter them. I'm not going to make that, a certain color, like I don't know, a blue maybe or something like that because of that brownish tinge, but you can take this into the greens, pinks, warm tones, and whatnot easily with this one still. Okay, so anyways, this type of foundation coat right here is things that give everything kind of a nice continuity, okay? Alright, so after that, you can stick with that same kind of color scheme. Now, if you notice, I just went with the re-inker fluid on a sponge. I felt that was... I've just started doing that these days because I have pads like everyone else. And sometimes, with certain colors, if you're not going to be using the certain colors to stamp in, like you just use the certain color to color things with, like this memento. I love this desert sand right here. But, you know, if I'm adding this on, I mean, it doesn't take a lot to just dab in here and go. And if you have a really wet pad, you know, this is going to be just fine to ink on like this, but sometimes I just find it easier just to put a little puddle of ink, sop it up, and just start layering it onto the scene like this, okay? It's just a little bit faster, and for me, like I said, if I'm not stamping some color out in impressions, sometimes you can get more ink in the re-inker bottle than you can in the pad that it might, you know, belong to. This one's old paper, but, you know, there's a lot more ink in that re-inker than this, and they cost the same. So I get pads and re-inkers, but these days, if I know I'm just going to be using it to color, I'm just buying the re-inker and getting, you know, whatever, 2 times, 3 times as much ink in it than in buying the pad. You know, I mean, you can buy both the pad and re-inker, but if it comes down to getting twice as many different colors in just the re-inker form, I don't know. I've just been opting to go that route. Okay, so anyways, we have those 2 different colors down here. We have desert sand and antique linen. I don't have the names down for all these different inks that I use. Limited amount of memory in my head. Okay, so anyways, I'm creating kind of a transition right here. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not stamping my imagery first and then coloring the scene that way, and I can certainly do that. But as dark as I want my impressions to be, I think I'm going to wait till the end just so when I'm making this video I don't have to wait or heat set or something like that and then get into my image. And sometimes when you wait for it to stamp your impressions later, and you don't color over them, sometimes it leaves kind of a more crisp impression than stamping it and coloring over it. I don't know, does that make sense? Okay, so anyways, just in general, this is down here. I mean, you kind of have to know, you know, your general kind of color scheme of what you're going after. And I'm loosely, you know, kind of good with it right now. I don't know. This is not a scene that I've done before. You know, it'll be, you know, a little bit different than some of the other scenes that I've done in the past, just because it is kind of referencing an existing photograph. You know, I always say sometimes it's better just to kind of leave things open, but like I said, I do learn a lot from referencing photographs. Okay, so in the grassy areas, I always like to show people kind of the process as well as just the instruction, but if I'm going to do some kind of grassy terrain down here, I like to work through a variety of values within a given hue, okay? So this one's going to be a range of green tones. I just happen to have, you know, a decent number of green tones in like this one brand here, but you can mix and match, and not all inks are the same. Sometimes the Marvy inks, like this one right here, is going to be a lot brighter than a lot of other inks out there. Sometimes I like to have that in the mix, but let's just see where it goes using this range right here, okay? Alright, so I usually start with light tones, then I work darker, okay? And that's just simply for the practical aspect of, it's just, I don't have to clean this out in between colors. If I go with dark and then I go into a lighter tone, then, you know, it's your best bet to kind of clean that off. But if you work in the same kind of color family, you can just go from one color to the next and not worry about it. Okay, so these kind of base layers like this, going back to that antique linen, are the things that are going to give your scene a nice, really rich color glow, okay? Analogous colors, which are colors right next to each other on the color wheel. You don't have to know color theory or anything like that, but just know that kind of working through several colors is going to be kind of it'll result in a deeper looking space, okay, than just using single ones, okay? Dye-based inks are transparent. So when I'm layering this on top of another color, see, that color is going to be quite a bit different than this color right here. That's just using it straight on white paper, right? But you can see that applied on there, it has kind of more of that warmer tinge to it, okay? And one of the nice things about transparent inks, too, is let's say if we don't have, let's say you don't have a lot of greens or something like that, but if you have like a warm tone antique linen, and if you put blue over the top of this with a little bit of yellow, okay, then you can get a green out of that. Okay? So just kind of the basic, you know, knowledge of color blending. Yellow and red makes an orange. You know, you can mix and match your colors, so you don't always have to just grab for, I'm doing a green scene, where's my greens? You know, put a little blue in there. And that's often my trick with doing a blue sky and green grass. I put blue up in the sky, but I also put that same blue down in the grass. Because when I go over that grass with greens, that blue is not going to read as blue anymore. But it'll kind of be there still, so it'll kind of lend itself to that type of continuity. There's going to be a relationship between the two different zones of color, all right? Okay, so I'm adding this green down here, and I'll take this down here and I'll kind of put it more in an earthy tone, but I added some of that green down there again just for that continuity. So we have the antique linen and sky, green, and brown down here. So three different kind of hues that are, you know, that might not be related. I'll try to make them relate to one another. Otherwise you have these areas that are kind of patchy and unrelated. You want a little bit of that bleed through, or a lot, for, you know, this general kind of scenic, I don't know, like I keep saying that, continuity, or a relationship. You know, you want these things related. Okay, but you see this kind of glow going down here. I'll kind of develop that. And this area up here, everything's going to be much, much darker kind of in the end. But, all right, so there's my kind of greens there. And there is somewhat of a glow to it, but let's incorporate some of these Marvy tones. So this is like a jungle green. Let's go with that bright green right here. I don't want grass that color. It's just way too bright, okay? But when I'm using this in here, all right, it's just kind of to create that kind of inner glowing area underneath the colors that will eventually become, okay? Or the eventual, maybe more accurately, the values that'll become of that. It's going to have a lot of black in this scene, just because of the kind of the period, the time period, time of day of that reference photograph. And I'm going way off of that photograph too, but like I said, I just want to keep it just kind of in the gist of it, at least, the spirit of that piece, with some of the kind of the main kind of lighting themes and color schemes of that scene. Okay. So those were some of those brighter colors right there. I mean, it doesn't look super bright because we do have these colors underneath these ones, but it seems to me to be a little bit richer in value. I need to re-ink. I need to ink up a new bottle green there sometime. This is the Marvy green right here. Quite a bit darker, isn't it? way darker, and very, very bright. Alright, and I don't want it to look that color either. So I'm going to be careful about that now. If I want this area to be light, I'm just going to be kind of sure that I don't tone that whole thing over. That's kind of the color that I don't like, but I like it as a foundation, so I've done these, of course, and I know what that, will look like when I get done with it, but these do go through this period of kind of this weird type of color scheme that's will serve me later on, but in the moment can look pretty weird in terms of the color scheme. So you can imagine if I had all of my images in here, this green would look like super bright and, I don't know, fake looking, I guess. Which can look okay. I'm doing an Easter scene and I want things nice and bright and cheerful and, not necessarily realistic or something of that sort. Okay, so greens. Let's start to move into kind of more of an earthy feel. So let's grab some of the inks that we think that might lend itself to that spirit. Okay, here's a Memento Rich Cocoa. So I'm looking for brown tones and whatnot. And let's see, I know the Distress ink walnut stain would be, really good for that. And then there's a couple Marvies that I really like to use. Here's a brown, and I need my other Marvie brown. Oh, no, I do have one. I thought that was one that, where my pad kind of disintegrated and I needed a new one. Okay, one of the things I was looking at too in that photograph was I felt that there was this kind of this warm orangish tinge to the color scheme in some areas. I don't remember where it was, but I think it might have been in the grassy area, so yeah. Should I use that green? I don't think I'm going to use that. That one's too bright. Okay, so I'm going to just switch to a new pad here, and let me just use some ochre on that. Okay, so let's see if you can see kind of some of the difference. Now the ochre I can bring down here too more, where this is going to kind of transition into kind of this brownish tinge. Okay. I would say that looks good. It looks good in terms of the process. It sure looks darn ugly, though, in terms of just a general color right now. But that's what we go through. We go through those awkward, teen years of a scene or something like that. This is the walnut stain right here. Notice how everything's starting to get a little bit darker, too. So this is what walnut stain looks like, okay, just on a piece of paper. I mean, I have a little bit of the ochre in it too, but this is what it looks like over the top of that. It doesn't even look like brown of any sort, but you can see it's kind of taking on kind of more of an earthy kind of a spirit in terms of the color scheme. Okay. All right. Yeah, so you don't need a whole lot. I mean, I use a lot of certain colors during the process, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have to use every color in that same, degree of saturation. Okay, here's the brown from Marvie. This brown is one of my favorites because it really kind of mellows things out where I want it to, okay? So look at that deep, rich kind of color scheme right there. It's kind of more sophisticated than just like one color, right? So you can see these other colors in here and what that's kind of adding up to. Alright, now like I said, most of the times I will be stamping my imagery out, or at least some of it, but on this one right here I just wanted to go a little bit differently and to kind of control the color schemes and lighting, I guess, a little bit more. So I didn't want to pollute anything Okay, so there we go. Starting to see kind of the general color scheme here. Or, you know, there's a bit of land down here, dirt, I guess, earth or whatnot. There might have been a path here. But then I'll address those, that sky area later. It's kind of, you know, everything, it's, in some ways the composition on things like silhouettes are really easy, because I don't have to worry about, you know, what color am I going to do those trees right there? Should I do, you know, it's just black. So it's just really easy to just go on in there and add that. This is a dark brown, okay? Oh, there it goes. Okay, starting to come together. This is really going to... I'm going to be going back to a lot of these colors later because I'm going to have to develop the shadows once I know where the objects are going to be. It's not just enough to stamp the objects out. If you really want to give those objects some kind of visual weight, you have to kind of put some shadows underneath them. And shadows aren't necessarily black, right? You know, I mean... You know, these pads right here, every one of these colors right here, you can see kind of a different hue, right? Or a different value of it. This is lighter right here, on the side of this is darker. So when you think about shadows, think about adding shadows in the color that they're represented in. Okay, so if you have some fabric or any type of thing like that, you know, the folds of it are going to be just darker, usually brighter versions of the areas of it that are in light, right? Because light tends to kind of wash things out. Brighter colors kind of on a foggy, rainy day than at high noon, right? They're lighter at high noon, but they're not brighter because, you know, bright lights will kind of wash things out a little bit. All right, I'm starting to get into kind of that earthy mellowness that I'm seeking right in here. By the way, these are color box stylus tools that I'm working with right here, and they're a really great tool to work with. ClearSnap has gone out of business, or they're not selling anymore or whatnot. I don't know if anyone's going to take over kind of some of their tooling and whatnot. I don't know, they were owned by Stampin' Up, or are, I guess. But I don't know if they're going to continue to make some of these things. They were run as separate kind of entities, so I don't know if that means that all of those properties are just going to be sold off by, you know, or whatever by Stampin'. I don't no idea what's going to be going on with them, so. Anyway, but these are available for a while, as long as we have them at Stampscapes. But, okay, that being said, sometimes you can just wad up a paper towel and just do some streaking like that, you know? Cheap and easy, right? And I've done that in other videos too. So I don't want like certain techniques or something like that. You'd never want something to be contingent upon the tools that you're using. You know, this right here I'm just using dye-based inks, but look at that glow starting to happen now. Doesn't it look like the light is coming from within the scene, you know, and out in those areas? And we'll try to do the same type of thing. It almost looks like a cool kind of abstract almost. Hey, look at me, I'm a painter. I'm not, I'm joking, but anyways, let's start addressing some of the sky too. We're getting really quite far along, and that's fine. You can work one area, you know, before another, but let's go up in the sky area. Now, I think that antique linen is really dry now. It's really hot here where I am, and I like working. It's easier to kind of work in a little bit of a wet surface, if you can imagine, when spreading these inks out. Alright, so if you're using any kind of applicator, it doesn't have to be these ones right here. If it's a sponge applicator, you don't want to scrub back and forth, okay? You're not going to get this color with one ink, okay? This was achieved through several, and it's just a very, you know, gradual process. And when you work in this kind of gradual process like this, okay, it may take longer, but nothing is being lost, okay? I've gone over all those other colors of inks right here, but even that dark brown on top of that, it is being influenced by all those colors underneath, even in the darkest areas. You see that kind of glow coming through? So all this effort that you're taking with, you know, these foundation colors like this are not lost in the end result, okay? They might not be pure versions of them because they're buried in there, but they're going to be there, And you're going to benefit from your efforts like that. And what a beautiful kind of glowing end result you can get from dye-based inks. I love dye-based. I love all kinds of inks, okay? It doesn't mean I'm not anti other media. One of my favorite techniques that I'm not particularly good at, but I love seeing, that not too many people do anymore, but I used to see early on in stamping, mostly back in the 90s, was colored pencils. There were some people that were really awesome at colored pencil. And I love those scenes that were done that way. I love the I'm kind of texture oriented. I like a lot of texture, and there were some really beautiful pieces coming out. A lot out of Germany for some reason, using colored pencil. All right, so anyways, kind of bringing this in, okay, and I'm going into that antique linen. I can even take this and I can put this into that horizon. This is such a pale pink right here that I can go into this grass. You know what I mean? This is not a problem going in here. It's not coloring it pink, but it's kind of lending a little bit of its kind of spirit to this area. So let's say if I put some of this pink down in here, this area down here will have something to relate to up here, okay? I can even put it in, let's see, let's put a touch of it right in here, okay? There's this little streak that I put in here, but it's very, very light. Okay, let me try to build it up a little bit, okay? This is not like Chinese calligraphy or something like that, where it's just, boom, it's there. I kind of work it through very pale streaks like that, okay? So it doesn't have to be that, then this, okay? You kind of work it around a little bit, then move it up. Okay, now let me transition this area in here. See, I'm kind of starting off and then I'm working in here. I think this area up here is going to transition into a little bit of blue tones, okay? Up top, so we kind of go for this, I don't know, what we used to call in graphic arts classes, split fountain. It's where something kind of transitions, you know, it's kind of like a rainbow ink pad or something like that, those transitions in there. So I have a little bit warmer down here, and then it'll transition into more of the violets up there. All right, now this color right here happens to be a Marvy Rose Pink. I can never remember if that one's the Rosemary, that one's a Rose Pink, so there's a little bit of a warmer tinge to it. This one's the Rosemary. For some reason, Rosemary always disintegrates pads faster than other colors. I mean, this pad is really old. It's like 20 years old, so I'm not talking about, you know, a matter of years or anything. But I don't know, it does that. It's like the chemistry of certain types of colors in order to get them that way, maybe super bright or something, kind of affects the their vehicle, the pad, you know, that pad in there. But I love it, though, whatever it is. Okay. And that looks good. Like I said, you don't have to go through, you know, a ton of it. Okay, it's mostly the base layers that are kind of lending itself to the, you know, the widest application within a given space. All right, this is just pink. This is a really, really bright color, okay? If there's a brighter color, you know, brighter pink out there on the market of any given range, you know, or something like that, I would say Marvy probably has the brightest version of it. Not that we want everything bright, okay? But if you want it, so we can always take a super bright color and we can make it more dull by just applying a lighter version of it, but you can't necessarily make something that's dull brighter, okay? I think we'd be fine without it. I'm just saying that if you add that in there, you can kind of, you know, do what you will with it in terms of the brightness of it. Alright, so let's take that up there and let's move into that bluish tinge, okay? Looks like I've used this applicator before. Let's go for some of the Tim Holtz tumbled glass here. I'd like this blue. Blue, I probably use blue more than any other color. you know, just, I don't know, I guess this very nature of scenic stamping. Blues, I don't know, you would think green, I don't know, I probably don't use greens as much. Alright, so tumble glass on the applicator here. It's a pretty light blue, maybe if you apply it a lot it's medium, I don't know. Okay, so I didn't put too much on here because we have this small space here, okay? So let's just come across it like so. Do you see what I'm doing all the time when I'm doing this? I'm kind of streaking like this. I'm from the outside edge of the paper in, and then when I want to get over here, I flip it and come this way. This is a very comfortable, you know, kind of ergonomic motion right here. And see, I'm just kind of moving my paper, not my hand, okay? You don't want to get too much repetition and build up, you know, kind of fatigue. Alright, blue, you can put some of that blue down here. I just have some extra in this wand. It's not going to look blue, but blue is a component of green, so might as well just wipe some of it off down here into that space. It kind of re-moistens everything too. Alright, so nice transitions up there. I'm not satisfied with that just as is. I want to kind of develop that a little bit more. Just in general, what I like to do too is I like to develop the different spaces within a scene kind of equal to each other. It doesn't have to be the same colors or anything like that, but if one area is really resolved and another area is not, kind of it's unbalanced sometimes. So that being said, so I want to apply a little bit more tone up top here, okay? This is, what is this? Orchid. So some kind of violet, you know, for your blues and pinks. Alright. See this area right here, it's super hot, so let's come into that. Kind of like I brought browns down here. We'll bring some other colors up here to just kind of mellow out the color scheme. And I think that's kind of doing it. Now at this point in time, I think I'm moving away more and more from that reference photograph as far as my memory goes. I have a really bad memory, but I tried to kind of soak it in and really observe that photograph. But this scene, I mean, at some point in time, it's good to reference things, but I think it's frustrating for replication. One of my professors one time said, hey, why do something, an activity that a camera is so much, you know, more suited for, okay? So what you do is you try to infuse kind of your own kind of sensibilities in something. You can certainly reference it, you know. There's certain type of emotional, I guess, kind of anchor points for someone, you know, that takes a photograph too. And when they go in and do it, you know, it can conjure up kind of some of those feelings that they had when they were taking it too. But sometimes it's just like, I don't know, like kids, you just have to kind of, you know, if they kind of, you kind of steer them in a general direction that you kind of want them to go in, but if you just try to fight, you know, fight the, I don't know, their inclinations and whatnot, as long as it's not hurting anyone, and scenes aren't hurting anyone, you kind of have to let it go in its direction, you know, so it might be something that's, kind of more suited for the media that you have, or kind of where, I don't know, just a scene is going in general, okay? It could be technique-wise. Okay, this is something like a, oh, this, I thought it was plum, it's wine. So that's kind of a nice brighter tone. Isn't that going to kind of serve us well? Kind of like on a nice horizon right there. All right. Let's move up and let's move into kind of a bright blue here. This is a number 10 Marvy blue. I'm starting to use a lot of colors here. This is sometimes more colors than I typically use. But there were so many different colors within that photograph. I think that's why they like the photograph, you know. There were certain families of it that were really nice. Okay, so kind of bringing that in. See how much brighter that got in that one area? It's more pure blue where I don't have any pink underneath it. And when I move it into this violet area, pink, it looks more violet. So see, we got all these kind of nice, I don't know, variations and transitions happening and color blends that are taking place here, kind of like, you know, the sky does during certain hours. And the thing that I liked about that photograph too, just personally, is I think I really like sunsets and sunrises and whatnot. I hardly ever see the sunrise, though. I see more sunsets than that because I'm kind of a night owl. But I think just in general, doesn't it all kind of look like sky now, you know? I think in general, I'm a big fan of Twilight. Not the movie or something, or a series, but the time of day, I think the colors maybe aren't quite as brilliant as sunset, okay? But sometimes those colors are a little bit more saturated. That's what I'm just guessing, you know, for me. And I like some of the colors that come out. One time I shot like this lime green sky, you know, and it was really amazing. Okay, this is violet, so getting pretty dark here. I might even use that violet in some of my shadows later for my objects. Okay, but I think that's about right there. Alright, now this is going to look really weird when I stamp my objects over the top of it in black, but one of the things I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to really anchor a lot of those objects within this given space and kind of establish, or not re-establish, but establish shadow conventions that are happening within this given space. Okay, so you see these trees right in here. I have this overhanging tree right over here. I need to go get a couple stamps too. And then we'll just kind of take it from there. We'll use some different grass textures and whatnot within this given space. I think this area down here can use a lot of texture in terms of the kind of the gravelly area and whatnot. But I can't wait to put in those kind of overhanging tree limbs in here, kind of in front of this kind of glowing sunsetty twilight time of day. All right, so let me go get those inks, or not inks, stamps. Okay, I think I have a general kind of idea of where I want things to go. I think I'm going to put this tree trunk right in here as kind of the dominant form within this given space. And then we'll have these trees back here, maybe. I might want them a little bit more distant. I have another choice for that. But this is going to be stamped in black. But, okay, so that being said, one of the things that occurred to me was I should lay down some kind of black tones first. I'll develop them later, okay, once I get the images in there too. But let's lay down some of these right now, okay? If you're going to have black images within a scene, I mean, you don't have to have the same degree of saturation, but in order to make everything kind of relate, or relatable, if you're saying that some image is black, okay, you're saying that the shadows are, you know, void of color, so it would make sense to add that same type of tone into the darkest of areas, the shadows and whatnot. Okay, but like I said, I'll develop them after I stamp the images down there too, but sometimes I like to get things started a little bit before, in this case, just so that I have some kind of, I don't know, just some established value. And it might not look black, but it will be some version of gray. And I'm kind of doing this now too because after I stamp my images, I'll have to wait for them to dry a little bit before I start adding in some tone because I expect them to be a little bit moist. I want these ones to be pretty dark in here. So I'm going to, make sure that I get a nice deep saturated impression. Okay. I don't want all, a bunch of stuff showing through my imagery. Okay, so you tap down like that, it kind of builds up a little bit more ink, and then sometimes I spread it out like so. All right. That is that. There's all kinds of different ways you can approach the coloring of anything. Okay, there's no set formula that you have to abide by. Okay, I think I got a shipment of rubber just now. All right, got a nice shipment of my space imagery in just now. Okay, so anyways, maybe this one will work a little bit, but I just grabbed a different image. This is called Oaks in Mist, and the other one's Oak Row. I can have that both there, but I don't want this. I want the silhouette of this tree to be fairly strong. I could put this in the background though, but I just don't know if I want to do that. See what I mean? If I stamp this in black and this is right over the top of it, this is kind of break up the silhouette of this. So, so these are the types of design considerations. Actually, that one, maybe I won't stamp these bottom trees down here. Okay, I'll just go for the top trees. That's one of the nice things about scenic stamping too. It doesn't look awkward for you to leave off half a design or something like that when you're stamping it out. You wouldn't want to stamp we wouldn't want to stamp like a word stamp or kind of a stamp and outline images, but trees, like a pine tree top, I mean, this is a tree right here, right? But that's, that could be a small tree, right? It's no big deal to leave parts of it off. We can stamp things way off the edge of the page and whatnot. That's the thing that gets a little bit different from if people haven't done scenic stamping before. Everyone, we're used to using all parts of a stamp. Okay, so if you have like a 3 by 4.5 inch stamp, sometimes people think, well, you can't use 2 of those stamps in one card size scene, a quarter page, but you can you're just using small portions of it. Okay, so these trees I'll put right about like here. I mean, I don't have to match it up perfectly on the horizon, but just in general, I'll kind of go roughly for that area. So you can use a stamp by itself. You can do it in repetition. You can use a stamp with their sibling images, but you can also kind of dissect it and use certain portions of the stamp for what you want. And in my opinion, as far as scenic stamping imagery goes, that's kind of a real kind of applicable design, and it won't pigeonhole someone into kind of limited usage. Okay, you want to be able to use your designs as much as possible, right? So you kind of have to look at scenic stamping designs with a little bit of a different eye, because you have to kind of consider the different applications for it and how it can serve you beyond its usage as a whole. Okay, and that's why I try to put a lot of different samples up in each stamp module to show how people have used a given design. Sometimes it's used in its entirety and it's very apparent, but sometimes, there's a little bit of a tree cluster where someone just wanted, a couple of trees off of that image. So we try to show all kinds of things like that. All right, so anyways, I think that served me well, better than that whole piece, because then it would start moving down into that. Okay. This is just dye-based ink. Now, I'm going to be using some VersaFine too for my darkest of areas, within this given space later on, but I kind of do that at the end because it is just so dark and pigment ink is really thick. If you don't know what VersaFine is, it's a pigment ink. Dye-based inks are kind of a water-based transparent style of ink, much thinner. Alright, so that is done there. And we'll have this tree. I tell you what, I think this tree was, I mean, it was a very different looking tree, but I'm going to have this. It was a little bit higher light. I think I remember that, like, you can see the kind of the root system underneath here. So I can't do that exactly, but I'll try to do something akin to that. All right, so let's get this inked up. I need to make sure, and I think I did. I think I re-inked this not too long ago, so it's going to have a lot of ink on it. That tree will show through this tree trunk a little bit, but I am going to darken this tree trunk with some additional shading anyways, so hopefully it works out. Now, there's a slant to this as everything kind of goes back into perspective like that. So I think for just as far as dynamics go, I'm going to tilt this a little bit. I don't know if you would see that, but it kind of goes along with the spirit of the kind of the visual movement of the scene. You can see that sky is at a diagonal like that. So I'm just tilting this a little bit that way, you know, just for effect. Whether it's effective, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But we'll see. Alright, now I'm holding this down because I really want that ink to transfer to the page. With dye-based inks, they transfer pretty quickly. If you're doing like a pigment ink that's much thicker, sometimes you have to worry about, or I don't know, you don't worry about it, but you be mindful of the fact that, you know, kind of stamping wet into wet, or wet into even dry because it's so moist from the thickness of paint. Pigment ink, I call it paint sometimes. You pull it off and it kind of creates a vacuum, and you know that ink gets trapped in the center, and then you have this kind of outline around your imagery. Some people were talking about that on Facebook in one of the groups, but I know exactly what it is. It's just that thickness of it and that kind of vacuum kind of effect. Okay, now you see where that tree, you know, you can see the tree through it, but I'm going to be adding opacity to it by adding a black. This is almost going to be all in silhouette. But let's continue this tree with some texture out there. And I also want some texture into that grass area, okay? Now, you can do this in black, okay? But I'm going to suggest, if this area is a certain color scheme, why not stamp out this image within that same color scheme, right? Because you're saying that's what colors those are out there. So the shadows, in terms of those shadows areas in here, would be that color, okay? So let's just add this down like so. I'm not going to be able to see it in much of it, so I can stamp it in multiple tones, okay? Or multiple values. Well, maybe tones and values, okay? Alright, so see that right there? See how it kind of added that texture? But you can't see that texture out there. So here's the thing about kind of pulling out the inks that you used within a given space, okay? I have my Mementos ink right here, so I just go back to that, and I utilize that color scheme to my advantage, okay? So I'm adding the darker version in the darker area, okay? It can't get too dark, because I still don't see it over here. I'm going to have to go all the way to black, okay? So you stamp out your kind of texture imagery in multiple tones of that given color scheme up there. So, okay, so if I had a cloud up here, it would probably be stamped in like a violet or something like that. You know, kind of make the relationships of all of your different components, make them relate to the color scheme of that given area. I mean, that's one way to go. You can stamp everything in black and just like color it in. It'll have a different kind of look to it, but that works too. Okay, my pad right here is really breaking down. This is like a 20-year-old pad. Okay, so let's go to the dark brown for some of these darker areas. Remember I used that dark brown down there? So this is where this kind of starts to really pay off for me, you know, so to speak. Okay, let me some of this down here. When I say this, I mean the color scheme and whatnot. This is where it starts to kind of come into play. Look at that. Really light versions of the texture, a little bit darker. Out here you can't even see it. I'm going to have to go all the way to black. I don't know if I'll be able to see them at all, even with black, because it did get pretty dark and rich over there. So, let me give it a try. Yeah, you can kind of see it a little bit. Not much, though. Yeah, let's go down here. Alright, so that is that. See that texture kind of, it's hard to see over there, I know. Alright, maybe I'm trying to decide if I want some of this texture in there. I guess I'm going to go for it. It'll take on a kind of a little bit of a different spirit too. But anyway, I just stamped it in black down here. But let me show you one of the other things, we're talking, while we're talking about continuity and whatnot. Let's go with some textures down here. Some of these, this is called Pebbles right here. And sometimes it's just all about the textures. Sometimes the textures are kind of the least kind of sexy designs, you know what I mean? It's not some kind of big thing that's very defined, but sometimes like these very general types of images can be the thing that kind of brings things together and utilize the most in many cases. Okay, so this rocky kind of texture down here. It won't look like this when I'm done with it, but I just kind of get it established like that. But see that glow kind of coming from in there? In here now? It's kind of like three, in some ways, glowing areas of light. You have light, dark, light, dark, light. And when you oscillate things like that, I mean, you can even say it's light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light. When you oscillate things like that, and it really doesn't matter where it goes, okay? On this one, I'm just referencing that photograph, but as long as you kind of have that type of spirit going in there, when you oscillate the use of values, it defines the lighting and it defines the shadows in here. But now that we have some objects stamped out in here, okay, I know where the tree is, I know where these trees are. I'm going to go in and kind of flesh them out a little bit, but I'm not doing anything with the designs, I'm doing it with their cast shadows down here. Okay, so let's go back in with some of these darker tones. Let's go back to the cottage ivy, that green, and I'll put some darker greens underneath these trees. Now I'm just kind of going like this on the side of my applicator, just so that I have a lot of control over the amount that I lay down. Okay, it's not going to, be take too long or anything like that, because the shadow's not going to take, over this whole area. Okay, that was about it with that one. Let's go in with like a rich cocoa or something, a brown maybe. That was a pretty bright green on there, that cottage ivy. Kind of surprised me, because I thought I already laid some of it down, but it did get quite a bit darker. Okay. Let's go down here too with some of this cottage ivy down here. I mean, not cottage ivy, the rich cocoa. And why not go up into this tree? Let's go up into the tree. Let's start to address some of this tree trunk here. I gotta be careful. That tree trunk, I don't know if it's completely dry, so I don't want the imagery to smear, even though it's going to be largely just dark, okay? Kind of more in silhouette. I do want some of those forms to, to read a little bit. Okay. So that kind of starting to, the shadow kind of schemes taking place. This rich cocoa is doing a little bit more than I thought it would. It's darkening where I didn't think it would darken so much. It's really hot out where I am right now, so I don't know if the inks are drying faster on here, but if it dries faster, it kind of sets up a little bit faster, and I'm able to go into it. When you're kind of inking wet into wet, sometimes it's not applying to the paper as fast. You know, because it's just so wet, so you're just kind of mopping up sometime. Sometimes it's almost like when you're trying to add a little bit of a darker tone, it almost seems like it's getting lighter, but it's because you're wiping off ink that you've already kind of applied. Alright, I'm kind of establishing this shadow coming out this way. Doesn't that look a little bit better now? So that's where these things kind of come into play. You just kind of keep utilizing your color scheme to work for you in kind of strategic ways and ways of continuity and, I don't know, richness and definition, I guess you can say. Certainly it's, you know, things are becoming a little bit more defined. This is really going to be fun adding the pigment ink foreground imagery. It's going to be really dark and rich. Okay. Wow, that is really dark. Let's bring... See how this tree just goes right into the grass like this? The thing that I like to do is I like to bring in kind of these transition imagery, or images, or textures, I guess you can say, within these given spaces. The photograph looked like it was a park or something like that, but I don't know, we can make this a little bit more wild. Someone didn't weed whack around the trunk enough or something, I don't know, whatever. Alright, so here's this grass texture right here. Alright. I'm going to mask off this tree trunk so that these reeds will kind of be behind it. I'll put some in front of it too, maybe, but let's start off behind it. I'm going to go like this. This is the extent of masking, you know, that I do if I'm masking. This is the extent of it about, I don't know, 90% of the time maybe. Something like reeds, nice light pressure. Don't squash it down on the tops right there because you'll get big fat kind of tops of, you know, the grass, you know, if you do that, but and you can kind of layer it a little bit like that. Okay, see that right there? So we now have that little bit of transition right there. Doesn't that look kind of more like a little bit more of a graceful kind of transition? And then I can put some of it in the front of it too, like so. And then we'll have some in the foreground as well. Okay, maybe I can put some more behind it, about like so. This is really hardly noticeable over here because I'm stamping black into something really dark, but let's see if we can see it. See that right there? Doesn't that look kind of fun? You know, now you have this tree trunk. It feels like it's coming from that area now. We're saying that this tree trunk, I mean, this large object within this given space, is affecting, you know, the area around it. So instead of just coming out, you know, with nothing around it, you've established a shadow, and you've established, you know, those little grassy areas around it like so. So it just, I don't know, it brings it together, it anchors it into that space, and it's just something as simple as, you know, putting some texture around it. All right, now, I don't think I used black yet in the toning here, but let's go into it now. I have to be careful with those reeds. Those reeds are really wet, and that rich cocoa was really, really wet, so that applied a lot of wet tones. So I'll kind of do this a little bit more gingerly, you know, a little bit of a lighter touch. Just because, you know, so I can retain, you know, the crisp impressions of like those reeds without kind of moving them around, because they are wet, they'll just kind of smear. Alright, so going into this with some more black, I stamped this tree out in black. Stands to reason that I would kind of tone it in black, remember? If you've used a certain color, then bring it into your shading, but also bring it into the image as well, maybe a little, you know, a little bit. It doesn't have to be solid black, okay, but just kind of bringing it in there like so kind of makes a stronger statement. Okay. So rich, glowing colors, okay? So that, how that translates into the technique here is we have established now areas of light and dark, okay? But the areas that are darker, they kind of transition through medium tones, the lighter tones, to the lightest, okay? Dark, medium, light, you know? I don't know how this goes, kind of medium, and that horizon's kind of light, you know what I mean? So you create those transition areas. So it goes from, it doesn't just go from light to dark. It kind of, you know, goes from light, darker, 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 no matter where you are, okay? So that being said, all that means in terms of an application process is when you get to your darker colors, okay, just don't take them in as far as you did. When people are first learning this technique, a lot of times they get the ink, the handling of this down, but sometimes in the medium and darker tones what they do is they came in the same distance as they did with the lighter tones, and then they've eradicated all the lightness out of it. So they kind of lose the lighting. All that means is you do a little bit less. Control your darker tones and be a little bit more perimeter oriented with them in terms of your application and amount of it, okay? Alright, but I really like this kind of lighting, coloring scheme, I guess. Right here, that's happening in here. I really like this area down here and that kind of glow. This one area here, I feel like I need to make this a little bit darker and have this a little bit brighter right over in this area. That's what I remember from that scene, and I like that about it. Not that this scene has to, you know, be like that, but I want to go a little bit darker. So I'm not going to do it with black. I'm going to come into it, okay, doing this tiny little bit up here, just to kind of close off that edge like that. But I'll come into that area of the grass just with the greens again, different values of greens. I thought I'd close that off a little bit with a little bit more tone, make it a little bit darker. Okay. Pausing. Alright, I've given this a little bit of time to set up here. That's not why I took off there. I had to go pick up my kid, and it's like 90 degrees here, so I picked him up at the bus stop, school bus stop, instead of walking home. So an interruption in the scene creation, but sometimes you got to do it. Okay, so sometimes this is good because I can see where things are kind of mellowing out a little bit. Sometimes the inks, when you apply them, they're really kind of hot. Now, I've left this ink in here, and I didn't Did I just re-ink it now? I don't know, remember. But yeah, but sometimes you can see things. Sometimes it gets so glossy on here. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on sometime when everything is really super saturated. Not that you have to wait, but I wouldn't have done that had I not. But sometimes it can serve us pretty well. Yeah, so just kind of adding some more of this down here. I thought about going and taking a look at that scene, or that photograph, but I was thinking a fence might look kind of interesting in here in the background. But let's add a little bit more of the shadow area. This still is, it's too light for me. I want to go darker in here. Maybe, and sometimes it's just a matter of getting rid of the lightest kind of tone in there, or value, by just inking it out. Alright, so let me try. So now, a lot of times what happens is, sometimes there might be some area that someone feels that it needs to be addressed, okay? And sometimes they do it with the existing color that they're working on. But if they're going back into a lighter area, I just think it's far better to go back into your lighter tones. That's why I always kind of recommend that people kind of just grab the pads that they're going to be using in a given space and just kind of leave them out so that you can go back to them, because it's not really a linear process where you just, okay, now we stamp at our scenes, now we're working from light to dark, and that's it. You know, sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen within a given space, especially when we're doing this kind of layering of color and things are becoming kind of really saturated. And sometimes you just kind of have to kind of let it evolve, I guess, and see where it's going, and kind of address those things as you feel, you see fit. Now, I know a lot of people think, well, how do you know? Well, I don't know, you have to kind of trust yourself sometimes. But yeah, I mean, it might take a little bit of experience or something like that. See that right there? Doesn't it look darker to you? So if you want to make this area darker, you just go back in and add darker tones. But it doesn't mean you have to add a dark tone. This is one of the earlier ones that I used, but it was darker than that existing color. So you just have to kind of take a look in there and say, I want to go a little bit darker than that. And if you have your pads that you've used, you can just kind of compare them, be it whatever brand or whatnot, to it. I need to kind of stop saying so many times. I was watching a previous video of mine and I was kind of horrified listening to that. It's like one of those drinking games. Every time they say something, you're supposed to do that. Well, we don't want that. But okay, so that looks much better to me now. And plus, it's kind of glowing now too, isn't it? It's because it's wet now too, and things dry kind of in a dull sheen sometime. So adding that back in there can kind of brighten things up. But I'm going to spray this later on anyway with a clear spray, and it should come back to that level of intensity and saturation in there. But I don't know, it's kind of feeling a little bit more kind of Twilight-ish, maybe, in terms of the color scheme and overall the value of it, I guess. It's the value scheme kind of more than the tones, I think. See, it's deeper now, maybe. Not that everything, a lot of times I like to leave things with a wider range, but this is a really specific time of day. It's kind of nice too, if you go into nighttime, you wouldn't see all these different colors. I put a moon up there or something like that, but sometimes during the twilight, you get kind of the benefit of having that really deep, saturated color scheme, and you can still see stars up in the sky kind of, starting to peer out and things like that. So it's kind of like that, that version of between night and day. You get the benefit of the color, but the kind of the mood of night maybe, or something of that sort. But nice and deep and rich. Okay. The thing that that's going through in my head is I'm wondering about this sky and if that is saturated enough for me. I might want something else in there. Let's see what this looks like with the antique linen again. Okay, I think antique linen is one that I do have a pad for, which is why I bought that re-inker, but I also bought a ton of other colors of re-inkers that I don't have a pad for, that I don't really need. Okay, so let's go back to this antique linen in here, and let's see if we can add that in here, and let's see if we can see any kind of difference right here. Maybe on the horizon like this. I'll go up into the pink a little bit, but I won't go like up into that blue and violet. Okay, I want it more kind of transitional up there. Okay, let's go over here. Let's go really kind of intense over in this area. Okay, now one of the colors I tried, it was either yesterday or the day before, I can't keep track of time. I think it was tea dye, and tea dye did more than I thought it would. I was pretty impressed with it. It's pretty light in value, but to the scene that I was working on, this little one called the Red Balloon, it did pretty well. I was able to really see the effects of it. It was subtle, but it added a nice deep warmth to the area. Now let's watch what happened down here. See that right there? Now this is dry. Now that would get more intense, like I said, if I spray seal it, but let's hit it right here. Let's see if you can see any difference. Okay. Now remember, this is the first color that the other one was the first color, but this is pretty close to the first color, in terms of value. But look what it did there. I'll add it to the greens too. So that's what's really fun about it. You can just go with these really light tones and you just kind of layer them, but together they create these really deep saturations. And it's not, the thing about this, I guess the bottom line is what I'm trying to show here is that none of this kind of process is a really precarious exercise in ink applications. It's not like I said, I always kind of make the analogy with the Chinese brush calligraphy where you put it on and man, that's it. Or a watercolorist would work that way too. This is kind of working incrementally and just kind of building things up slowly. If you work, incrementally through the different values. I mean, this right here was greens and browns and pink, there was pinks in here, but they're all kind of lighter values. I'm not working with really dark tones, except in the shadows, of course. But look at that beautiful, glowing, rich surface right there now. I mean, I really love that glow right there. And when I look at it like that, I mean, to me it looks like the color is almost coming, or the lighting is almost coming from within, because we make it kind of darker. And you might not think this is kind of something that you're familiar with, but I bet every one of you has done something like this. If you're a stamper and you're watching this, chances are you are. But when you do something, even if it's on matte paper, you color something a certain color around a figure, and then you do that vignette around it, you do that sponging around it. That's what this is right here, okay? It's like this little area, except I've taken it into more colors on this side, so I've made it darker, okay? So there's like that little vignette there, you can have a little cutout of some person, that's a scene. This down here is kind of partial, and this one up here is just kind of using a couple different color schemes. So instead of one color and then a vignette all around it, it's just kind of different colors. So there's just vignette, vignette, vignette. And what you have is dark light, dark light, dark light. Okay? So it's just kind of the same concept, but it's all in one piece here to represent kind of these different zones of color. So if you see things that way and you kind of see that kind of analogy or that relationship between kind of your existing techniques, it's a lot easier to get into something and to apply this type of technique with those, I don't know, whatever skills or whatever experiences and techniques that you already have in your repertoire. All right, this is a salvia blue right here. I thought I'd go a little bit richer up here in the blue tones, okay? It just adds a little bit of a different hue. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't use it, you know, the tumbled glass would be fine, you know, the distress. But this is just kind of me kind of experimenting around. I think I want to go down into this pink over here a little bit, just to vary it a little bit and mellow it out a touch. Something like that, maybe. So it's like, it's kind of turning down the intensity a little bit over here. But I still think it's rich, though. But it's kind of a little bit more in the spirit of this area down here, just really saturated, really rich, but not super, super bright, okay? In terms of like a pure color. Like, you know, super bright pink. I don't know, it feels to me, as I keep turning this down, it keeps going later, so it's like during the summertime, well, it depends on where you are, but it's like becoming later and later, the darker you go, you're kind of darkening it by like 10 minutes or something like that every time you kind of put a new color in there. Or a new value. Okay, so, alright. Let's take a look in here and see if there's any other types of things. I might want a little subject in there. It might be kind of fun to put like a deer or something like that. It's coming out. If this is like a little park or something where some people are walking, maybe it's, you know, comes out and, you know, for a little bite on the grass or something like that, you know, after everyone's left. This area down here, oh yeah. I like to add in a little bit of extra texture into those spots. Okay. I think I saw it somewhere. Where was my little rock stamp? Alright, video pause. I can't find it. My table's getting very, very cluttered right now. Okay, here's my little tiny rocks, and there's some overhanging tree limbs. Maybe I'll grab another one too. That'd be perfect for this, kind of hanging down like so. But let's go this. Now I use the pebbles in here. They're kind of more open rocks. But I love texture, okay? And I think it just looks a little bit more full when you utilize texture to strategic advantage. Okay, let's take a look here and let's see if you can see what's going on with this. Okay, I'm doing it in the dark brown right now. And I can carry that out into some of my grassy area. Okay. So there that is. So you can utilize your color scheme, right? So I stamped these in browns down here. It's a brown color scheme, so you use your imagery in brown, like that. And see, it kind of just merges right in with that, but it's a little bit more, I don't know, varied and rich in terms of the imagery, okay? Now I'm going to take and stamp some impressions of this out in black as well. So multiple tones, right? Because we have some black down here, and it is very dark in that area anyway. wouldn't be bad to kind of use the larger version of this as well, just for some variation and to create a little bit of depth within that given space. Alright, this is my Rocks in Water small stamp. It wasn't the tiny rocks that I was looking for, but these ones are fine too. These ones just have a little bit of a shadow underneath, kind of at the base of the rock. Okay, so adding some of these in here like so will give me a little bit of a different scale for those kind of rocks down that way. It's just kind of more of a texture than anything. I mean, they're not the star of the area right there, but let's take a look at that area down here. And a lot of that we might not be able to see in the end, but see that right there? Yeah, so yeah, those pebbles. The imagery becomes a little bit more subsurface oriented too. In addition to colors, okay, so I've stamped out my pebbles, I think it was just in the brown. Maybe those tiny rocks were dark brown, and then I've done these ones in black, so you can see you can vary your kind of the depth of imagery too. It's in addition to colors, so you're just working your color schemes around to your advantage. Okay, let's see. I think we're ready for some foreground fun. Foreground's really where a lot of things kind of, compositionally they really come together, because foregrounds can really frame a piece off really nicely, and then you just punch that extra depth within your given space very effectively with the use of dark forms. So this is a really saturated piece right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp my foreground. Boy, I can really feel the kind of the ink in this paper right here. We're going to use VersaFine in the foreground right here, and we want it nice and dark. And VersaFine really fits the bill. It's a pigment ink as opposed to a dye-based ink, so sometimes it even looks a little bit more three-dimensional, I find. Alright, let's see here. Okay, there's some reeds. Same type of grass that was right around on our the base of the tree. I really need to counterbend this. This is a 10-point thickness paper, glossy cardstock. I wish it was a 12-point. 12-point only cost just a few dollars more per ream, but... And that might buckle too and bend a little bit, but... not as much as the 10-point. So I always recommend to people to get 12-point. Okay, so nice dark impressions. I don't go picket fence with this across here. You know, at the same level, you stamp it out, and like with all the Stampscapes designs, it's kind of a little bit better if you overlap and vary the angle between impressions, so it doesn't look like, you know, so much of the same impression or same stamp used over and over. It looks a little bit more natural like this. Can you see that? You can see it right there, really, in the glare. Okay, why don't I add some more over here? I am inking in between impressions here, and I think I'm going to tilt this a little bit more this way. Okay. That's quite a bit of an angle right there. Let's like, what, 45 degrees. Just because there's a little bit more movement coming this way, and maybe I'll go like this over here again to kind of keep things kind of moving that way visually. A little bit. I didn't have everything tilted, but see that right there? So you can see that kind of glowing area behind that layer. Okay. All right, now let's address the top. The top. This should be very effective too. That was the Reed's large stamp. Kind of echoes the smaller version of it back there as well. So you get a little bit of that continuity of form, which lends itself to kind of a little bit more of a harmonious, I guess, end result by having kind of universal. Okay, I need to see which way this is going. All right, so this is this stamp right here is just called Leaves, and maybe I'll use the Leaves hanging version too. So I'm going to bring this in here, and this will soften up the transition of that hard tree trunk going up in this, the air, the sky and whatever like that. Okay, so we're just presuming that these are the leaves from this tree. Okay, kind of hanging from above like this, and I'm kind of overlapping it. I make these branches and my foreground types of things thick enough to where you can just do it once, but I want it airy enough, though, where you can add as many layers of it as you want without being too, cluttered. And that's one of the things that is really important with stamp designs. It's for, well, certainly for usability, but the smaller details are about visual weight and density of the forms within that space, so that you can do things with repetition, where things don't look so similar, but you want them similar enough. You want it airy enough, but not too airy, and the textures have to kind of be correct, I think, to form kind of a more graceful kind of end result. Like that. See that right there? Now see this right here. If I wanted to leave that nice and airy, then I can, and you can see more of the background. But see, if you layer it, it doesn't look so full that it just looks cluttered or something like that. Too much, in other words. Okay, let's go down here a little bit more. All right, now this is, I think, where this is going to depart from that foot. I just feel I want something right in there, just to kind of, I mean, it looks pretty good in terms of like open space, but that to me sure looks like a stage or something like that for, some kind of object or animal or whatnot. I'll have to think about it though. But let me add a few little highlights into it as well. Okay. I love textural form in the form of additive types of processes, texture stamps, rocky stamps, etc., etc. But it's kind of really fun to go into something as well, okay? And to add something in here that almost looks like a subtractive process in the end result because it's white, okay? So it looks like someone bleached it, but it's really an additive process because we're just putting this, white gel down. Okay, so this is where I have to be really careful because that ink is really wet. You can probably tell it's, kind of wet still. See that right there? Oh, you can really tell right there. See how wet it is? I don't want to smear it at this point in time. I don't want to smear it at any time, but that'll take a little bit of time to dry. But let's go in here now, and let's play around with a little bit of gel pen highlights, okay? There's not a lot of light in here, all right? It's very subdued, so I don't want a bunch of real glistening little highlights everywhere, but kind of going into this area where there's a little bit of light hitting in there, it stands to reason that we'd be able to see a little bit of highlights, and you see it everywhere. Everywhere on your desk right now you see this, and it's called something they call specular light. It's light that's brighter than white. This pad right here has some specular light in it, right? Because it's kind of reflective. You see that little, you know, area right here. This is just white right here, but you see these little glares like that? That's reflective light coming off of it. It's coming off this pen right here and this, you know, tip, this silver or whatever chrome tip right here. That's specular light. That's white right here, but that's the reflected light. And that's doing these little things like that is not, it's very small and minor, but I think it's very effective in terms of the addition of it. Okay. So it's just doing these little things like this. Let's see if we can even see it. See it down there? But look at what it looks like overall. It's not real obvious, right? But then we get it right in there. Look at that little lighting in there. Doesn't it look kind of magical like that? And that would be the case. I mean, if you took away all your specular light, all your highlights off everything, this is just wood right here, but there's that reflection, you know, of light on it like that, right? You can see it probably on my, you know, gummy looking inky nails too, like right in here or something, you know. I don't know if that's really specular light, but it's lighter, you know, it tends to be the edges of things. Alright, so kind of adding it in. Now you wouldn't have a lot of reflections in the shadows, right? Because that's, you don't have light reflecting off those areas, so I wouldn't really add those down in those areas. Okay. Let's add a little bit down here too. Maybe it is, oh, I don't know, a little bit of a highlight on a couple of these reeds or something like this. It's kind of like little magical little notes or something like this in this area. Let me see if I can show you. You see that? I mean, it's not very apparent like that, but when you see something at arm's distance, you know, those little kind of highlights like that are kind of fun. Alright. Now, white is really showing up against this background, but we can use colored highlights as well. And maybe I'll add some of those in. But here's some of these leaves right here. So in the lightest areas, around maybe some of these leaves, maybe I'll put a few little highlights like this. I'm not putting too much because there's not a lot of white light in this piece. We've gotten rid of a lot of the white of the paper, but if there was white, I would probably use more somewhere. I'm working on this upside down because I can access these leaves from this point without kind of dipping my hand into that, you know, those bottom impressions. Okay, let me see if we can see at all these little highlights on some of these leaves like that. See these ones over here? There's like a couple dots or whatever. These ones right here. The light is coming from below, so I kind of bottom lit these. So a couple of highlights on the bottom side of those leaves. Now look at it. The light is kind of strongest right here, right? So on these leaves over here, I'm going to light, in other words, put a couple dots on the left side of some of these leaves, and let's see what that does. I won't do it on every one of them, just kind of do it on a few here and there. So you'll get the effect, but it won't be so extreme. Okay. See this right in here? See how those kind of stand out? Don't they look a little bit more three-dimensional now? See it right here? Here's my tree trunk right here. Dare I put a couple of those on that? Let's see. I'm barely touching this. This is a Uniball 0.7, so it's pretty thin, but I'm just barely touching it as well. See how I'll put a few little highlights on that tree and maybe on a couple of these reeds. Okay, do something like that. Isn't it barely little dot? Maybe it's too much, but it kind of stands out a little bit. Let me dab down some of those, okay? I'll make them duller by just removing some off, that ink off. Okay, something like that, I think. Just to make it stand out from the background a touch. Okay, now, like I was saying, gel pens are really inexpensive these days. If you buy them like I do. I bought some in a gigantic pack, and there's a shocking range of tones with them. Like this one right here is a brown. And this is a glitter one, I can't tell. But you can use gel pens in colors from your color range. Oh, I know it's going to be perfect for this. See that pink up there? Let's put a few little wildflowers in that area, okay? Let's try to keep it subtle. I'll put the pink in the area of green, roughly around the same value as that pink. So see, I'm taking some of that pink from up there and putting it down here. And hopefully it kind of reads as a little bit of wildflower touches, but they're very subtle. Look at that. So maybe, who knows, maybe it's just little grasses with dew on it, but they're reflecting that pink from up there. See that? You can't even see it. It's hard to detect, but you look a little bit closer, and those little pink highlights are there. So those little types of things are really fun to do. They're real, they're subtle, and they can just kind of add that little element of continuity in a different form. We can put some of these up here as well. Alright, and what I was saying earlier about, you know, kind of contemplating, you know, what are some of the reasons why I like Twilight so much, it's for the fact that you can get some of those little elements of nighttime within the daytime, you know, or while there's still kind of residual lighting enough to where you can see those types of colors, but why not add a little bit of star, you know, like the first star that you can see in the sky, maybe, or something like that. Maybe I'll add it right here, something like that, so that maybe represents a little bit of a star. Maybe I'll put a smaller one here and here or there, you know. Oh, I said you know again. Okay, so there's a little couple stars up there like that. And what does that do? Those are the farthest reaches of the scene, right? It's a white little dot right there. But where else do you have dots? You have a dot in the foreground, so you have this continuity between the farthest areas of your scene right down to the nearest. They represent something else, so I don't think when anyone sees it down here, they're thinking, oh my god, there's stars on this reed, just as though they're not saying, oh, there's a reflection of something up there. That looks like a little, you know, star or planet or whatever. But you have that continuity of texture working in here now. Okay, so I think it's time for the star of the scene, which will be something. I'm going to go look for some little critter to put in there, which I think would be really fun, and possibly kind of set the mood for the entire piece. You do all this work and kind of, you know, the final thing kind of stamped into a given area can suddenly become, you know, the total focal point of the entire scene, rendering everything else secondary. But that's the beauty of it. They kind of play off of each other, and I don't know, it creates kind of a focal point and a visual anchor for the viewer that takes a look at the scene. So I'm going to see if I can find something that I want to put in there. Okay, this is the one that I felt inclined to use early on, so let's just use this one. And this one's just the dough. Here's a little trick, though, too. going down to the smallest of details here. If you're stamping some object or critter or whatever, it represents grass that they're standing in. If you just stamp the creature in its entirety, you'll have the feet, right? And that would be something if they were standing on dirt or gravel or something like that. But if they're standing in something a little bit deeper, then what I do is I wipe off the feet, right? Because you wouldn't be able to see the feet in grass. I mean, if it's standing in really tall grass, then you wipe further up the legs. Okay, so I'm wiping it off like that. So I didn't take off too much. It was probably like a 16th or 1/8 of an inch maybe. I don't take it off completely. I just kind of do it with a dry paper towel. If some of it stamps out a little bit, then that's fine. Okay, so I'll place it about like so, I think. Moment of truth. You don't want to kind of smash this down when you get into your smaller stamps. Sometimes after stamping with larger stamps through the entire process, a big tree, kind of this large, thing of leaves and whatnot, the row of trees and and so on and so forth. Sometimes people get into the smallest of stamps and they use the same pressure that they've kind of built up a muscle memory with through the course of the scene, and then they smash their smallest of things down, and then it becomes, a little bit more smashed of an impression. So just remember, just light even pressure. Alright, isn't that kind of a fun little critter in there? Doesn't that kind of create a nice focal point or whatnot? It wasn't in the photograph, of course, but if there was a deer there, I'm sure the photographer would have loved to have, incorporated it into that, so we can do that in stamping. You can add whatever you want and kind of make the piece your own. Let me see if I can do something here without mucking it up. Alright. Let's add, now that we have our object here, remember how we added shadows at the base of different things? Well, that's an object right there. And I say not mucking it up, because I don't really feel like waiting for that dough to dry, but let me see if I can add a little bit of a shadow underneath the figure. Okay, that was a little bit of the bamboo leaves. Let's go with maybe a dark brown or something. And what are these? These are just colors that are in the color scheme, right? Okay. I forgot about, here's jungle green. Alcohol pen. You can also use alcohol pens. You probably have all kinds of colors in your alcohol pen range. Oh, my diabetes thing is still a little wet, so this is kind of moving it around. Normally they wouldn't mix at all, but my ink is still a little bit wet down there, so it's moving it around a little bit, but who cares? Here's a warm gray. This is shuttle art right here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Kind of anchors that down in the scene a little bit. And then you can take your blender tool or blender pen, kind of blend that out a little bit. I'll take my blender and I'll blend that out, making that ink application maybe a little bit more graceful. See that like that? Yeah, it's a little bit too brown, isn't it? Sometimes looking through the camera lens in the back of the camera kind of reveals something that I don't see. I don't know, whatever, in real life or whatnot. Okay, so like that. blending it in a little bit more. Okay, there we go. I think that's better. So a little bit of a shadow around our star of the scene, the focal point, the last thing I thought about or whatever. Although I did think about it early on. I was thinking, maybe a deer or something like that, and that scene would look kind of nice. So let's take a look here at the overall piece. It took a departure from the source, but I think the spirit is there in terms of the general overall feel of it, maybe the tones or whatever, the mood, and that's what I typically am going for within a given piece, more than replication or the capturing of definitives. But let's do something as well, just in a very subtle way. Let's go in with some pigment ink. Okay, Hero Hues Unicorn, any kind of white pigment ink would do. That little star right there, let's put a little glow into that star. Okay. With a really, really dry touch, okay? Don't just ink up into your applicator, your Q-tip, or whatever you're using, and just go straight in there. It'd be way too much ink on your tip, so let me see. I kind of fray the tip a little bit too, where it's, you know, really soft. You want a soft application, then use a soft applicator. Okay, and just right around that little star right there. Let me see. So a little glowing star now. It's different in texture, right? To these other stars. So it's like the brightest little star. Who knows? Maybe it's a planet or something like that. But I don't know. It gives a little bit of a different spirit to it. Let me see if I can put a little bit of this fog on the ground, maybe. Maybe there's a little bit of moisture in the air. It kind of starts getting rid of some of my shadow, but it depends what you want. Maybe I want a little bit of shadow, but with a little bit of atmosphere, so maybe I'll put some of this in the meadow. Some little pigment ink down here. Some moisture starting to kind of turn into fog or mist within a given space. Sometimes I put too much, so I just kind of dab it off like that. It does dry darker, though. And some of these background trees in here. Okay, let me access it this way again. Let me put a little bit of fog at the base of some of these trees. It kind of turns a little bit more, I don't know, maybe magical looking with something like this. That's what they do in all the movie sets and whatnot. They're always big on fog machines anytime they're depicting, you know, some set is at a certain time of day or after nighttime types of situations. Certainly Twilight, and sometimes midday they just use it because it just looks cool. Okay, and the same thing applies. If it's in a kind of a darker area, maybe don't use as much, because you wouldn't see so much of that reflected light in the form of, you know, some of those suspended moisture, which is fog. Alright, but see that right there? It's kind of like that little texture up there. Kind of like final little touches right here. So, okay, so fun scene. I don't remember the person's name, but I have a bad memory anyway. But thank you for the inspiration for this piece with your beautiful photograph. This is my take on it. I really liked the things that struck me from the photograph again, were the deep, rich tones and the kind of glowing, saturated areas of different hue from sky, and that transition of colors up there. I really like the perspective to the things going back into a kind of like a vanishing point. I think there was more to it up here, but I just kind of darkened it over here. And then this area down here, which if I looked really close, had that kind of that change of hue where, underneath the canopy of trees, a lot of times you don't see grass just growing right up to it if it is so thick up there that light can't penetrate it. I don't know, I could go a little bit deeper up here with some additional tree form, but I think I'll just leave it as is. But anyways, I added my little deer in there. Maybe the doe liked your setting, and it looked like it would be a great place to grab a bite. So a little bit of a different take, or an additional take, a tweak on it. So hopefully you enjoyed this piece right here, and you got kind of a good idea on the benefits of layering colors if you want to go for that look. I don't think it's the best way to go. I love all kinds of looks. Like I said, colored pencils and pastels and things like that. This would be a perfect composition for pan pastels, doing those streaks in the sky like that, changing the color scheme around here and doing those transitions of green. And then right down to browns, so transitions, any type of media that's really great at transitions would be perfect for this. But anyways, I'd like these in terms of glossy cardstock and dye-based inks. You can really get this kind of nice glowing type of look where hopefully, let me see if I can get this glare out of the way like that. Hopefully it appears as though this is the time of day that I was kind of trying to depict. And hopefully it kind of makes for that kind of same spirit as far as the feeling we would get from being in a location like this. And that's one of the things I really like about landscape stamping in a way. When you're doing scenic stamping, I think the whole experience of doing any type of craft is creatively transportive. But sometimes when you're stamping a scene out, you can kind of take like an emotional journey into that location, because the things that we are depicting in scenes are, whatever given location at a given time of day, season, whatever, and sometimes it's not always depicting places that I've been to, but places where I'd like to be, or, I'd love to have a little cabin in a little area like this, or I'd love to go on a walk that would look like this at Twilight. So in the time it takes you to do something like this, kind of on a subconscious level, I think we transport into those locations during that little time, and it kind of gives us a little bit of a mini vacation. So thanks for watching again. Thanks for tuning into the channel. If you have any questions, drop us a note in the comments section. If you like this video, hope you like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.